Well, being that we're doing something down south, they figured they would call me for another comeback about these kind of things. Well, this show's going to be about Memphis, Tennessee wrestling, but let's look at other things from Memphis, shall we? Like the Rendezvous. You want barbecue? Beale Street, baby. The Rendezvous can't be beat. There's Jerry Lawler's restaurant, too. You want to check that out when you're in Memphis. If you got to stay somewhere nice and beautiful, try the Peabody Hotel with the world-famous Peabody Ducks. That's right. A bunch of ducks will walk right into a pool, right for your viewing pleasure every day. So let's get down to Memphis. Do you know that John Hyde, the great rock and roller, he wrote a song called Memphis in the Meantime that even mentions the Rendezvous restaurant. So take it from me. Check out Memphis, Tennessee. Oh, you had to check out the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Yeah, you're right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I am Bob Smith. You might remember me from eons ago when I was the managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine and all the other London magazines, including Sports View Wrestling, with those scintillating apartment house wrestling pictorials, guys. They're worth millions in the black market, if you know what I mean. Joe, laugh at something, will you? My co-host, Joe Puccio, is looking at me like I'm nuts. Thanks a lot. How are you?
I'm doing great. No, I'm just thinking about those apartment house wrestling ads.
One of them was the famous porn star who became Sika, who was a big star in the early 80s, late 70s. So ask me how I know this. I heard it from complete strangers.
Not to be confused with Sika the Wild Samoan.
No. God rest his soul. No, definitely not that Sika. Although, you know, the wrestling Sika had better hair, to be honest with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, he had better hair than everybody. How you doing? How's things going?
I'm doing well. Living my life.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Overworked and underpaid, but what can I tell you? I just been watching a lot of wrestling lately, more than I'm really used to. For some reason, I'm kind of hooked on since Raw went to Netflix, I've been watching it more often. I find it to be one of the best produced things that they've ever done. I mean, it really looks like a sporting event, which is kind of cool. But you were saying you were watching SmackDown recently, and you've noticed a trend?
Yeah, one of my biggest pet peeves, especially, I don't know why, it seems like this has been happening even more than usual lately. But I think I was watching SmackDown maybe a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And the show opens, they introduce everything, now the new thing is they show the guys sort of like walking into the arena.
Walking in, yeah.
Which I know people like that. I do not like that. I get
really?
So Wyatt. I don't know. I just don't need to see everybody like.
But when you watch an NBA game or a MLB game, they do the same thing.
This is true. I mean, again,
but you know what? I don't care about that either. I'm old. Put the game on. Show me the field.
Exactly. I mean, I if you like that sort of thing, that's fine. I just want to get to it already. But that's not even the point. They're showing that. All right, that lasts 2 minutes. And then the show starts, and what do? It's silence for 5 seconds, and then you hear the Jey Uso's music, and the whole crowd is doing the yeet, and they're moving their arms up and down. Now, granted, I don't get this at all, the whole yeet thing, and I don't even understand what the hell they're talking about, but whatever, they're doing it. Uso comes down, he comes through the crowd. He walks and he high fives, he's signing autographs, he's shaking little kids' hands, he's doing the the cool handshake with Michael Cole when he gets to the table and he's looking at this guy, he's looking at Pat McAfee, whoever's with him at that time.
Right.
Gets into the crowd, and then the whole crowd has to do the arm movement, the yeet, for another 5 minutes. And then you think maybe something's going to happen. And next thing you know, Cody Rhodes' music starts playing. And now he comes down. And you know how long that entrance is, where he's got to do the whole dramatic thing where he crouches down, he gets up, and everybody sings along, and he takes pictures with the kids, and he does this, and he's Mr. Goody Two-Shoes and this and that. He gets into the ring. By the time that dies down, I mean, it's literally, I'm not even exaggerating, 20 minutes before one of them even starts talking. We're not even talking about a wrestling match yet. I mean, I'm just talking about a promo. And then they start talking and they go back and forth. And then, I think the first match didn't get in the ring till what, like 8:35? And, the show starts at 8 or something. I mean, I don't know. Am I the only one that just can't handle this?
I saw 2 successive Jey Uso appearances where he's in the upper deck.
Yes.
And he's going to walk down and he's going to start to do the thing with the arms and everybody's eating and having a wonderful time. And he gets into the ring. And on 2 successive, right when you think it's over, the crowd starts going one more time. And they do it all again for about 5 or 6 minutes. And I'm watching my hair turn grayer. And I'm like, boy, do they sell the sizzle and not the steak a lot. WWE has mastered nothing going on and making you get involved. But see, there's the key. It's the audience participation. It's the same way with Daniel Bryan doing Yes. Was that his deal? Yes, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They covet that, LA Knight. Yeah. That's what gets over. The fans want to be part of the show. However, we're sitting at home. We're not there.
Right.
Nobody's eating at home. Nobody's standing up in their underwear, having a Pabst Blue Ribbon, getting out of the lazy boy, going yeet. If you are, you got mental problems.
Yeah,
right? There's something wrong with you. And I'm telling you right now, it is too much. At least for an old timer like me, I don't appreciate it. I would almost rather that they show edited highlights of all the yeeting and then get on to the actual talking. And even that's not a wrestling match. Remember the days where it would say, "Welcome to Championship Wrestling"? Bruno and Vince would say something. There'd be a commercial break and ding, ding, ding. The wrestlers are already in the ring. The Guy Galani years. The wrestlers are in the ring when they come back from the break. Now, how long does it take even preliminary guys to walk to the ring? Right? How long does it take, Otis to walk to the ring with his posse there? Or how long does it take, the New Day to walk to the ring? I would like to time simply the walking on a 2-hour show. Just the walking.
That brings up a good point, because I was just going to mention that, everybody talks about the lengthy wrestling shows nowadays. I mean, I will say I've been pleasantly surprised with Raw that now that they're on Netflix, I could be wrong, but I don't think they've gone the full 3 hours since that first episode. I think they generally go about 2:15, 2.5, something like that. SmackDown, though, is 3 hours now. I don't know how much longer. There's rumors that it's going to go back to 2 in the summer, whatever the case is. But I mean, you figure, how can they have so much content? Well, of course it's 3 hours. I mean, half of that time is commercials and ring introductions.
Right.
It's just unbelievable.
All right. Let's segue. You just brought up something popped in my mind when you said that, commercials. Let's say it's LA Knight versus Andrade, right? And Andrade belts LA, and he's outside the ring. He's laying there prone. And Michael Cole or Joe will say, "Who will survive this match of people?" And then they go to a break.
Right.
How come they know to go to the break at the exact moment when they're hitting the ground? All right, come on, folks. The commercial break within a wrestling match should be abolished. I don't care. I really like the WWE product now. But the commercial break thing, even if it's picture-in-picture in either organization, that or AEW, I'm just not fond of it. Show the match and put commercials between the matches. I know I'm barking like an old guy, but what can I say? I remember when you'd watch a whole match. Now, this, of course, is not as bad as the old days, and every federation did this. There'd be the main event at the end of the show, right? 1 hour show. And there'd be 6 guys in the ring, 6-man tag team. They're brawling, and everybody's all over the place. Well, we're out of time. We'll see you next week on Championship Wrestling. Now, this is nothing new, obviously. That's worse because you never got to see a conclusion. If it was a competitive match, oh, Morales versus Victor Rivera, who will win? Oh, we're out of time. Oh,
Yeah, it's funny you say it's worse. I don't know. I go back and forth on that because to me, it's almost like it. I mean, maybe back in the day, I thought it was worse, but now you think back, and it's like that kind of gave it a sports sort of like a sports feel, like a sports element, where it's like they didn't know when the match. Because I mean, think about it. Wrestling essentially is a match between two performers, and you're not supposed to know when the wrestler's going to win.
Phooey. On a tape syndicated wrestling show from the 70s, why
Oh,
did I have to watch Joe Turco versus Frankie Williams to its completion, but not the main event? The
okay.
psychology between those old main events that always ended, oh, we're out of time, was to make you go buy a ticket to see the same match in your town 2 weeks later. Get
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Get it? I still
You know,
didn't like it. I couldn't go. I was young. I was
I
young and
can remember.
vulnerable. I couldn't even make it outside the house. I didn't even have a pair of long pants back then.
I can remember one of those. Remember when WWF did those NBC Friday night specials? They did a couple of them. I'm not talking about Saturday night's main event, but I'm talking about like they did a couple that were on Friday nights, and that was the one where Hogan and Andre had their big angle with the twin referees
Right.
and all that. There was one of those shows I still remember. It was only an hour. It was like 8 to 9 on NBC, and for whatever reason, at like 8:55, they started the tag team match. It went against all things WWF did at that time, where they put the main event on last, and they did, I believe it was like I want to say the Heart Foundation and the Brainbusters or Strike Force. I forget who it was
Mhm,
exactly, but
mhm.
they literally cut it out. This was a live show, and they cut it off at 9 o'clock on the dot, and they said, "Oh, we're out of time, folks, and we got to go. We'll see you next time on WWF," and that was it. I remember I was shocked because I was just not used to that. I just couldn't believe that on a live WWF show that it was
That
so
was
sort of like produced in a weird way because they didn't do stuff like that.
I'm gonna
And
take
it's
a I'm
funny
gonna
you mentioned that. Yeah.
I'm gonna take a right turn on you over that Hogan thing because I think that was, for my money, the first chink in Hogan's popularity armor, where he's back. I forget it was Gene Okerlund or whoever is backstage. He's going, "They were identical, identical," and he was overacting like a soap opera wannabe, and it was awful. I mean,
Well, it
when they
was
did the
Vince.
thing with
Yeah.
Savage and Elizabeth, I thought there was good acting in that. You lust for Elizabeth. But this was, they were identical. Identical. I mean, oh my lord, man. He wouldn't have been hired for a Florex commercial with acting like that. Come on.
But you know who it was? It was Vince on commentary during that show. I remember it like it was yesterday. Vince, when Earl and Dave, I forget which order it was, but Earl was in the ring and then Dave came in after, and Vince was like, "Jesse, what's going on there? Is this did somebody have plastic surgery? Did somebody have plastic surgery to look just like did Ted DiBiase pay somebody to have plastic surgery?" And of course, me being a little kid at the time, thinking like, "What?" Like, was there like, what do you mean? I'm not thinking like, oh yeah, there's actually another referee that's, he worked in a different
Well,
territory.
being older than you back then, I had seen him in the NWA, and I said, "Oh, that's his brother."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's the thing: the WWE was such a ratings juggernaut at that point. I don't know how much of their audience crossed over and would know that. I don't know how much that the fans would know that. It's conceivable that, I mean, they didn't fool me because I was a full grown adult, mind you. I was, a loser sitting there watching wrestling on primetime TV. But anyway, no, I'm just kidding. I kid. But you know what I'm saying? It's like it.
That's a good
I
point.
I found it almost incredulous that more people didn't go, "Oh, that's Earl," or "That's you know."
Well, I think like you said, I mean, I think it's basically the age because I think at the time I was fairly young, so I think like the younger you are, obviously you just believe stuff, you just didn't really know what's going on, but obviously I would assume the older the older fans in the crowd knew that that wasn't the case, and maybe they knew there was another ref in the NWA or whatever it was. At the time, I mean, they did cater to kids a lot. So I mean, I don't know. I guess they were banking on a lot of people not knowing, what the deal was. I always thought it
Mhm.
was a cool angle. I mean, of course, if I saw that angle today as a fan, I'd probably be, thinking this is the dumbest thing ever. But I mean, it all depends on your age, I guess.
I was still in newspapers at that point, and a fellow reporter named Bob Dial. Bob, how are you, buddy? He. I remember speaking to him on the phone after. He goes, "Man, I never thought of an angle like that." He said, "That was great."
Yeah, yeah.
He said that I never would have come up with that. I'm surprised somebody to come up with that before, is the way he put it. So uninitiated non-fans thought it was novel.
Yeah.
So they did their job. As for me,
Exactly.
I was nonplussed because it was like it was a phony finish and, controversy reigned and Hogan was saying, "He was identical." Just one of the see, that was the first chunk. Then there was another chunk that came off when he argued with Sid Vicious at the Royal Rumble in 91 or 92, whatever that was, when Flair won the belt. I was there in person, and they booed his ass off, Hulk Hogan. So when they booed Hulk Hogan recently at the first Netflix, I
Right.
was not surprised because this is a mounting thing with him. He became, you know who he is? He's Felix Unger of wrestling. Taken in small doses, he's entertaining. But if you had to hang around with Felix Unger all night long, you would go, get this guy out of here. That's Hogan's old persona. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
rating now. And I don't think that fans booed him for any other reason other than, oh God, not this again.
Yeah. I'm torn on that one. I don't know. I think that's part of it. Definitely. I just think he's, I think the other part of that, I mean, I think what you're saying is fair, but I think the other part of this is that we forget it's been so many years
Yeah.
since he was at the height of his fame. I forget that sometimes because when I grew up, he was like the end all. I mean, there was nobody bigger than this guy. It was like he was everywhere. People loved him. And I say to myself, well, how could fans not care? Like, how could he not be in a big surprise at Raw? How could he not be a big surprise at Mania? The answer is because it's 2025 and, his heyday was in 1985.
Right.
So it's like, that's a long time. You know what I mean? And I try to tell myself that it's the same thing like back then when I was watching wrestling, when a guy like Bruno came out. I mean, yeah, we all respected Bruno back then and I love Bruno, but a lot of the younger fans probably didn't really care about Bruno in the 80s because they were looking at the new superstars, which were Hogan. And nowadays, the equivalent to Hogan would be guys like Roman Reigns and CM Punk and those guys,
Well, I put it to you though, at that same, I believe it was the same event where they trotted out Tito Santana and people of that ilk were at the same time and they cheered for them. So what's the difference between Tito Santana and Hulk Hogan then? Why would they cheer Tito Santana and not cheer Hulk Hogan?
Well,
I
I
just
think,
think it's overcooked. That's all. The real American bit. I think if he came out in a suit and waved, I don't think people would have minded so much.
well, that brings up another point. You mentioned Tito, and I forget who else was there, or whoever,
I
some of the
think
old timers.
Hacksaw
Valentine,
Duggan.
Duggan, maybe Greg Valor. Yeah,
Right.
Duggan.
Yeah.
And,
Coco
uh,
Beware.
Coco Beware. And those guys, let's put a big difference too, is they weren't out there hawking something. They
Right.
weren't selling something. They were just in the crowd, just waving. Whereas Hogan comes out and it's like, oh, what's this guy doing? Oh, he's trying to get us to buy his crappy beer. So it's like that could be a part of it too, where people were just like, come on, we don't want to see this guy trying to make a buck off his light beer or whatever it is, So it could be that we, obviously the speculation on the politics. I mean, that, don't forget it was in LA. I mean, it was in Los Angeles and
I don't buy it had anything to do with
no,
politics. I just think it was just the moment. I would almost guarantee you if he comes out again in a month somewhere, he won't get that same reaction. And maybe at a smaller card or a regular Raw event or something, I bet you he's not going to get booed that vociferously because
yeah.
he is still Hulk Hogan. He drew a lot of money in the day.
True.
But, hey, now, when I was with PWI, I learned to love Memphis wrestling, and we have guests right after this segment. We have the great Mayor John McCall and Willy B from Wrestling Talk with Mayor McCall podcast, and we're going to talk about old Memphis wrestling. My question for you, though, before we get started with that is, did you have a lot of have you watched Memphis wrestling, being an East Coast guy or whatnot? I have, in the years that passed, it's pretty readily accessible on YouTube and on some streaming services. Do you ever look at it?
I've, to be honest with you, I didn't watch a lot of it back then because it just, like you said, it wasn't
Right.
accessible to
No
me.
accessibility. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a different era. I mean, if it was now, it's different. Now you can just find something on YouTube or you go somewhere. So I really didn't watch it back in the day, to be honest. I have, looked at clips, on YouTube and places like that, especially since your podcast has come out. I've been familiar with it there. And I mean, I know it's a cliche, but the major, I'll always say that I still love the Andy Kaufman, Memphis stuff that went on. I mean, that's just, that there's nothing that'll ever come close to that. So even though that is just a small part of it in the long run, I still have a deep appreciation for that.
Do you have a DVD player?
I still do, actually. I know a lot
So
of
do
people.
I.
Yes.
I don't have a Blu-ray. I still have a DVD. I insist to everybody out there, get a copy of the movie, the documentary, quasi like called I'm From Hollywood. It's got Andy Kaufman on the cover. It's the entire Memphis feud, not just the beginning of it, the middle part, the end. There's interviews with Robin Williams and Mary Lou Henner, and they're also about this wrestling thing. Andy, come back to this. Why are you doing this wrestling thing? And it is spectacular. Fans giving their view of the intricacies of the Kaufman-Lawler feud while sitting on their back porches. It's great. It's so much fun. 90 minutes. The DVD costs about 10 or 15 bucks. It's worth every penny if you're into Memphis wrestling or want to see the greatest feud ever with a non-wrestler. This is the DVD to buy. It's great, man. You're going to love it.
That's really cool. No, I don't think I've seen that. And I mean, is this something that, how old is this?
Oh, no, the thing's probably 15, 18 years old at this point, 20 years old. But Comedy Central used to, I remember taping it off Comedy Central back in the day. They showed it all the time because Andy Kaufman was in it. But it's really, I'm surprised more people haven't seen it. I keep bringing it up and nobody I know has seen it. They saw the thing he did, My Breakfast with Blassie, which was a little more accessible, I guess.
Of course.
But this is long before that. And I'm telling you, it's straight from Memphis TV, action from the Mid-South Coliseum, interviews with Lance Russell and Dave Brown and everybody who was involved. Oh,
I have to check that out. Maybe I can even now go on eBay.
One of my favorite. No, it's on Amazon. You can grab it right there.
Oh, you can just get it on Amazon? It's still in print?
It's still in print. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely still in print. I wouldn't even mention it if it wasn't still in print.
Okay.
But yeah, if you're into Memphis or haven't seen it, this is a good, is it primer or primer? How do you pronounce that? Like if you want it as an introductory, like, media, is it primer or primer?
I think it's primer.
I think it's primer too.
Yeah.
Like the first coat of paint is primer. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The introduction.
Really should check that out. I mean, that's, like I said, and we've talked about this on previous podcasts, my love for that, for Kaufman and just his contributions to Memphis wrestling and just the angles he did and just how he basically just did not ever break his character. I mean, to the point where people only till a few years ago had no idea if it was kayfabe, if him and Lawler really hated each other, the whole Letterman angle. I mean, that stuff is gold. Unfortunately, that can never happen again today. It's something that will never happen again, but I'm glad we have it on tape and I'm glad we're able to revisit it whenever we want.
Excellent, man. Yeah, check it out. You know, if you don't get one, I'll get one for you because it's like there's nothing I've enjoyed in wrestling more than that film. It's really great. And they have an original soundtrack to it. It's really good. And it feels like Memphis. When you see it, you will feel what Memphis felt like when I visited. So by all means, everybody check it out. I'm From Hollywood, or the entire Memphis crew, Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman. Wow. Good stuff. And here's more good stuff coming here after the break. We're going to have Mayor McCall and Willy B here. So don't move. We're going to have this commercial announcement for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Don't you go anywhere if you know what's good for you, all right? Well, I reckon it's time to do a little bit of an update for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Let's see what shows you can enjoy several times every week. They've got a veritable cornucopia of wrestling podcasts, so let's dig into it. Pretty much the flagship of WrestleCopia is the Wrestling Memory Grenade. Join host Ray Russell as he analyzes and discusses years of wrestling history from your favorite promotions. From Hulkamania to Mulkymania, from the Midnight Express to the Lex Express, they've got it all. Tune in and get a big piece of history on the Wrestling Memory Grenade. If you like nostalgia, this one's for you. The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. What a legend Bob Roop is, and he welcomes you to the Wrestling Stoop as he shares stories, historical moments, and all kinds of memories from his 20-plus year career as a wrestler and booker. And you know he got wild near the end of his career. Find out all of it on the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. One of the most unique wrestling podcasts anywhere is DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join host Dan as he travels back in time to discuss the history of pro wrestling in Japan. He's spent decades studying the world of Japanese pro wrestling. Now he offers up his historian-level knowledge to you. You'll learn something on every single show, I guarantee it. That's DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. The great Gene Jackson hosts the Retro Wrestling Review. That's RE-View. Brings in a variety of co-hosts and wrestling legends to the program as he goes back in time to watch and review pro wrestling from years ago by. Get the breakdown, hear never-before-heard stories, and feel free to watch along with them. It's worth it, let me tell you, especially if you're a USWA fan. Enjoy the Retro Wrestling Review. When this show started not all that long ago, it was called Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. Now, it's Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich, two of the great stars from Memphis and beyond. You'll learn all about them, hear great old school stories, stuff you've never heard before, definitely on Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. One of my personal favorite podcasts out there is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty, a meat and potatoes named for a anything but a meat and potatoes show. Join him as he reminisces about pro wrestling history with a variety of legendary guests and topics. And what I like about him, he knows everything about Dick the Bruiser, Bruiser Bedlam, and the WWA. But that's only part of what you'll hear on Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. It was the WWF versus WCW, Raw versus Nitro, the Monday Night War, the Ratings War, the NWO, the Attitude Era. Now, there's a podcast all about it. It's called Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. They break it down with episode reviews, you name it. If you want to know all about that classic ratings war, listen to Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. One of the most unique podcasts you'll hear anywhere is the Othership podcast. It's a pop culture contest with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, music, TV, food, and of course, pro wrestling. They take on various topics in roundtable discussions, special guest interviews, and other content concepts. As they say, laugh your ass off on this voyage aboard the Othership. New episodes are in the bag for the Captain's Corner pod. Join Captain Nick as he presents the Captain's Corner podcast. It features old school wrestling interviews and discussions, plus all the latest goings on in the world of the Captain's adventures. Nothing else quite like the Captain's Corner pod. Also on the WrestleCopia network, the Glory Days GrappleCon cast. Hosts Barry and Captain Nick present the Glory Days GrappleCon podcast featuring memories and special interviews with wrestling stars of the past and even those of today. There's even more at WrestleCopia, a podcast called TR Shocks the World, the WCNN News, and the Power Hour. It's quite a lineup with more new podcasts joining all the time. It's the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. How do you get involved? It's pretty easy. Go to their constantly updated website, WrestleCopia.com. Click a few buttons and take a voyage into wrestling's past, present, and future. Get it all at WrestleCopia. Anybody who's listened to this show for any length of time knows there's nothing I love more than Memphis wrestling. And there's a podcast out there called Wrasslin Talk with Mayor McCall, which started just a little bit after I did, I think, 3 years ago. And we have not only Mayor McCall here, but we've got the co-host of that show, Willy B, and we're going to talk Memphis wrestling. How you guys doing? Mayor, it's good to see you. It's been a little while. How's everything?
Things are getting a lot better. You know, a lot of people know the tragic, loss of our son, the day after Thanksgiving last year, but, still having days and moments, but I appreciate, yourself and the whole, wrestling community. A lot of people have reached out and, sent their love and prayers and just want to tell everybody thank you. And that means a lot to the McCall family.
That's great. It is a community out there. Us old timer wrestling people, I find it's very comforting to know that people care, in an old school way and in a human way. And I saw the reaction that you got when you were going through your troubles, and it made me feel good to know so many people responded to you guys. So, listen, day by day, man, I know what it's like to lose somebody. So I don't know what to say, but I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad your show's doing so well. I saw you just had Sergeant Slaughter on the show.
I did. That was a big treat for Willie and Foxy and I. And we turns out that Sarge's daughter was a big fan and supporter of the shows. She made that phone call to Pops, and he said, That's all my little girl had to say. So we're very fortunate and blessed to get Sergeant Slaughter on the show. Our first true WWF champion since, Jack Tunney doesn't want to recognize the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase.
Good guy, too, isn't he?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
great. Yeah, great guy. Great guy.
And we got Willy B, a genuine American hero. Willie, good to see you again. Or actually, I've seen you for the first time because the last time we did a podcast together, I didn't see you, so I'm seeing you now. I'm hoping you enjoy coming on my show now.
Man, absolutely. Thank you, Bob, for having us, man. Anytime we get to talk Memphis wrestling and outside of our own podcast is even better. So I love that you're a fan of Memphis, and we look forward to going over these matches.
Man, I'm telling you, when I got the job at the wrestling magazines in '88, the whole PWI bunch, and I started to get those weekly tapes from Memphis, that was probably my favorite thing I did during those years, was getting those tapes and just as much Memphis as I could get my hands on. It was, it was so good. Eric Embry was booking, and Lawler was doing his thing as a baby face, and it was just so much fun. I never saw anything quite like Memphis wrestling, particularly Dave Brown and Lance Russell as a tandem. They were family. They weren't announcers. It felt like you were seeing your family every Saturday morning. Am I right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it was different than most, wrestling promotions with them because they were the quote straight men, right? They rarely if ever got touched by the wrestlers. They brought credibility. Dave, as everybody knows, was the local weatherman, and he was the weatherman around Memphis. I mean, we have other stations, but when you turned on when we had any kind of bad weather, it was Channel 5. Lance, being as the man that he was, and the legendary producer and TV director and all those things, all those years, they brought legitimacy to professional wrestling. Even as gimmicky as Memphis can be, with all the characters and the fun and the fire and all the craziness the King could come up with his booking, they brought that level of legitimacy where you felt like it was a real sporting event.
Absolutely. John, did you ever meet Lance Russell?
I have not. Actually, Willie has had the pleasure of meeting Lance.
I got the pleasure of meeting twice.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
When he was with the NWA, though, that's when I met him.
I met him the first time I met him in 2013. He came to an event down at the casinos in Tunica, Mississippi, which is not far from Memphis. And it was Lawler and Dundee and the whole Memphis crew. They had a big autograph signing and a wrestling show that night. Lance was there, and he was so kind. And then fast forward about 4 or 5 years, they had a Hall of Fame event at Lawler's place on Bill Street, and I believe I forget who went in. Lance, I think Lance went in that night. Dave went in that night. Randy Hells was there. But they had a meet and greet downstairs, and one of my best friends who worked at Channel 5 with Dave, has known Dave for 30 years. They worked together. We went down and got to meet. I got to take a picture with both Lance and Dave, and it's one of my prized. I sent it when I first met Shane. I sent it to him. I said, "This is one of my most prized possessions. Is I have a picture of myself with your dad." So
now he's speaking of Shane Russell, who was Lance's son. You know what I love about the current wrestling scene and doing this show? I've had Lance Russell on my show, as you guys have. I've had Paige Sutherland, the daughter of Kurt Von Hess, on my show, and I'm hoping to get soon Justin Race, Harley Race's son, on my show.
He's great, by the way. He's great.
He's amazing, isn't he? He's incredible.
We had him on, and he is great.
He's amazing. I mean, I went to the International Wrestling Hall of Fame ceremony this past year in Albany, New York, which is not far from where I am here. And I'm talking to Kayla Sparks, the young wrestler, and here comes Justin to say hello to both of us. He talked to us for about 40 minutes, and our jaws just drop open. The stories he had just off the top of his head about his dad and what he went through as a son of a wrestler, absolutely riveting. He's an absolutely fascinating guy. And I love the way all three of these people are. And more than that is other kids like Sergeant Slaughter's daughter who are keeping the memory of their wrestling careers alive. We need a lot of that now.
Agreed.
We really do. I don't want these people to be forgotten. John, you agree with that, right?
Absolutely. And speaking of Shane Russell, he just does a phenomenal job of, preserving his dad and the family legacy. He just does a wonderful job with that. So something very cool I got to experience with Shane through, starting the podcast and all. I got fortunate enough. I got to do some announcing for the AWA, the Arkansas Wrestling Association. And I can say that Shane and I have announced wrestling matches together.
That's amazing. That's great.
All right.
Oh, do you have tape?
I don't. We took a lot of pictures and stuff that night, but I'm sure through the annals of modern day technology, that's available probably somewhere on YouTube or something. But yeah. That was definitely a highlight, man. Getting announced wrestling matches was with Shane Russell.
Well, we can talk about the people of wrestling till we're blue in the faces, but we're here to talk about great matches that you guys have seen in the Memphis area, in your home area. I have a couple. Like I said, I ventured there just for a week and I saw about 3 cards, but I do have a couple that I saw on television. So, John, why don't you start since you're the mayor here? And and just when I think of your favorite match you ever saw, what do you think? I mean, there must be one moment you went, I'll never forget this.
Well, everybody knows I'm a huge Brian Christopher fan, so I would say that my favorite ever match that Brian Christopher had was Brian Christopher against Dr. Tom Pritchard, chain on a pole match at the Mid-South Coliseum with Eddie Marlin being the special guest referee, and that actually led to the following Saturday on Channel 5 Wrestling in Memphis. My all-time favorite promo that Brian ever cut. I mean, some people might not think it's the greatest and all, and it's probably not, but it's just something me personally that just really sticks out, and I remember most of that promo to this day, and it just it's something that really sticks out for me.
Willie, how about you? There must be one match that you go, I'm so glad I saw this.
Well, one match, my favorite all-time match, and it's only because the match itself is okay, but the meaning that it had to Memphis and the meaning that it had to the Memphis wrestling territory in general. May 9th, 1988, Jerry Lawler beats Curt Hennig for the AWA World Title. And to put it in perspective of what people around not from this area don't understand is that Lawler had been on that chase for the title for the previous 15 years. I think Jared had tried to get the NWA belt on him. It didn't work. He had tried previously to get the AWA belt. He had all these matches with Bockwinkel all the time at the Coliseum. One time that the crowd thought he won, they took it back, all those things. And for Jerry, even though the AWA was kind of on the back end, for Jerry to go in there and win, it was a massive, massive deal. I mean, it was Jerry Lawler Day in Memphis. It was all over the news. You would have thought that we had a local team win the World Series. Like, it was that big of a deal. and it just, but what it did, for Memphis wrestling, it kind of closed out that era in many ways. And then, where it started the USWA, but it kind of closed out that previous era where it was super, super red hot. And just to have that as an all-time, my favorite, that's just my favorite match. And I'm also a huge WWF Mr. Perfect fan. So, yeah.
I'll chime in now with a match I saw long before I was with PWI, and I forget where I saw it or how I saw it. And I forget the year even, but it's the legendary empty arena match with Terry Funk and Jerry Lawler. I mean, I never saw anything quite like that. I didn't even know the setup for it. I just ran into the tape somewhere, and I went, holy smokes. First of all, was there anybody like Terry Funk in the history of this sport? So believable. Yeah, so believable. So just no wonder he acted in films because he just had it. He made you believe everything he was doing all the time. And of course, Lawler was the perfect opponent for him. Similar sized guys, brawling all over the place. It was magical to me. And it was the type of match, even though you saw it and it ended, you wanted to see more. Like if that thing went on for an hour, you'd go, I'll watch every minute of it.
And think about how hard that is for them to do a match with no crowd. And so there's no, they have cameras there, they have mics, they can't, you have to be careful calling the match. Just all the intricacies that you can hide with a live crowd. They pulled it off flawlessly. I mean, that shows the professionalism and just how great they were at their craft.
John, what do you think?
Absolutely, and that's one of the first too, because that's some very, very rare footage. You can actually see Lance Russell smoking a cigarette.
You're right. I do. That's really true.
I mean, he couldn't stand that at all. He was like, "Oh man, I wish they wouldn't have, caught me, smoking a cigarette, because Lance was very, very professional in that manner and all, and
But I thought it made him look nervous. Somebody hand me a cigarette because I can't. What am I looking at here?
Yes.
It's like you ever meet a real smoker? If they're stressed, they reach for a Pall Mall. It is what it is.
Back in those days where it was normal, like you smoked inside. It was not that was.
Oh yeah. Gosh, the first wrestling matches I ever saw in Albany, New York, there was a haze. There was smoking a lot, and everybody was smoking. Every third person had the Marlboro hanging out of their mouth, and it was like we didn't even think about it in the 70s. It's just the way it was, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Right.
Well, there's still some of the clubs in Memphis that they allow smoking now, music clubs.
I think for the most part, it's been gone. It's been banned. Like if they serve food at all, there's no smoking. There used to be a rule on Bill Street that like after like 9 or 10, they may allow smoking, but I hadn't been down there in a few years, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
But overall, like the restaurant wise, it's gone. So and no indoor. You certainly can't go to any arenas and do any of that stuff. No.
Yeah,
So,
I gotta get back to Memphis. That's all I know. All right.
barbecue's still good.
Yeah, I'll bet it is. John, give me another match, man. Something that really rings your bell.
Man, something that really, really sticks out to me too is 1992 as Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the Wrestling Observer, feud of the year, Jerry the King Lawler, Jeff Jarrett against those stinking Moondogs.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Richard Lee.
And I say this with all my journalistic credibility because I hear this kind of thing all the time. Yes, it was PWI's feud of the year, and the fans legitimately voted for it. I don't want to hear people go, "There's no way, they never saw that match." Yes, they did, because people heard about that match all over the country, and that was the beginning of the tape trading era in '91. So you could watch videotapes from all over the world at that point. People were into that feud. They were into the TV matches that the Moondogs were beating up kids with the chairs and all that stuff. And Jarrett and Lawler were just dead set on beating those guys and getting them out of Memphis. It was an old school brawling style feud. And boy, was that stuff hot and heavy, John. That match must have been something.
Man, they also revisited the a redo of the 1979 Tupelo concession stand, Lawler and Jarrett against the Blonde Bombers, Latham and Ferris, and they incorporated the concession stand brawl back into that feud as well.
They had to. Oh man, I've heard about that match and that entire series of matches, and that's good old fashioned Memphis brawling right there.
It was real. It had a real element to it. As you said, we were kids during that time. We would turn on the TV, and I mean, it was they were working stiff. The Moondogs came out, and I mean, they beat the crap out of Lawler and Jarrett. They were hitting with bones. There was blood. I mean, it felt when Lawler got on TV and yelling, you could feel the rage. Like you believed that he was ready to kill them, that he was going to get revenge.
But I felt bad for the preliminary guys too. When Richard Lee and the Moondogs came out, they were slamming him with chairs in the head and in the back.
But he would hit the whistle.
Yeah,
that's when you knew, and he would come on out. He had the chairs and the bones, and it was on at that point. You knew.
Fans, there is Memphis wrestling all over the interwebs, and a lot of different streaming services carry it. You got to look up that version of the Moondogs because it was the wildest thing you will ever see. To this day, I never saw a rougher tag team. That bunch, those two, or the three of them. I should say there were three that were there. Oh my gosh, man, those poor kids. One time, Jerry Little brought one of the kids back out to talk to Lance and Dave, and he said, "Just show him your back." His back was nothing but bloody welts and purple marks from being slammed in repeatedly with a steel folding chair. Nasty stuff. But you know what? Like you said, it added to the credibility and realism of what people were watching.
And I don't feel like that Richard Lee really gets his due respect and all too, because he just added a whole nother, element to those matches too.
Yes.
Young fan, a young kid, you legitimately thought that he could control those Moondogs with his whistle.
Yes, you could.
Yeah, and when you have a team like them, you have to have a manager, right? They have to have a mouthpiece. So you can't not have a mouthpiece, and he was absolutely phenomenal. Very underrated, as John just pointed out, and it's unreal just how good he was. And it's one of those things that I think we've tried to get him on the show. I know John has tried, and we would, if he's out there ever listening, or anybody that knows him, we would love nothing more than interview Richard Lee.
I bet you would.
I have turned over every stone, nook, cranny. I cannot. Nobody knows what happened to Richard Lee. I believe his real name is Leroy Smith, if I'm not mistaken. But it's like he legitimately just fell off the face of the earth. Nobody has heard or seen from Richard Lee.
That's kind of strange, isn't it? Because he was a big part of Memphis for at least 7-8 years there, right? I mean, it wasn't just the Moondogs. He managed other people too. He had a history. I know people look at the managers from Memphis and they think Jimmy Hart and Downtown Bruno and stuff like that. But after them, I mean, that's probably your top 3, I would think, of all time.
Well, we
had one more manager that doesn't get any love, or I say he doesn't get any love. He passed away a few years ago, Scott Bowden, and
Wait a second. I hate to show my ignorance. I didn't know he died.
Yeah, he died in April of 2020. I'm not sure if it was COVID related or what, but he passed away. He did the Kentucky Fried Wrestling for a lot of the fans that know. But he was an underrated heel manager. He was unreal. He kind of took a mix of Jimmy Hart and Jim Cornette. He was the spoiled rich kid from what's called Germantown, Tennessee, which is the local area where all the local rich kids lived back then, at least 30 years ago.
Right. Even I know
So
about
that was his shtick. That he was a privileged kid from Germantown. He drove a candy apple red Mitsubishi Eclipse. He always brought it up, and then he always claimed that he was Bobby Bowden's nephew. So he'd come out with a Florida State helmet, and that's what he would use as a weapon. He was a great mouthpiece. He managed Tommy Rich, Doug Gilbert. He was good. He was really, really good. There's some feuds with Bruno that got real personal that were actually really, really funny.
Question, guys, didn't Bowden hook up with Lawler for a while? Because I think that Lawler turned heel in the early 90s.
Lawler had a heel turn in around the 95 time frame.
Right.
Lawler had that heel turn. And yes, Scott was his manager.
When they were working that flea market.
Yep. The big one. They call it the big one. The flea market.
Yep. That's right. Yep. Chicken on a stick.
Around the same time that we had a young man named Flex Cavana was hanging out in the USWA. So yes.
Mm-hmm. Wonder what happened to him. I don't know.
I don't know, man. It's a mystery.
By the way, folks, he's The Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Willie, did you give us another match or?
Well,
I think it's your turn.
One of the more famous matches would have been April of '87. Would have been the hair versus hair match with Tommy Rich and Jerry Lawler. I mean, I'm sorry, Austin Idol and Jerry Lawler with Tommy Rich camped out under the ring. It was a steel cage match. And the crowd went absolutely nuts because they thought there's no way that Lawler's going to get his hair cut. Now, granted, they cut his hair, but he didn't really shave it. But nonetheless, it was still a pretty big deal. And the rumor is, I think John could tell you, he interviewed Tommy. He will tell you better than I can that I think Tommy claims he was under the ring for at least 6 hours with about a 12-pack or more of beer and just waiting his time. He had to stay under the ring the entire time, all the undercard and everything, just to make his appearance and cause Lawler to lose. That was a massive, massive draw in Memphis, and it was a huge, huge feud.
That's probably one of your best examples of prime Memphis heat because firsthand accounts of people there that night will tell you that they really thought the Coliseum was going to go into a riot and a frenzy that night. It's just it got scary for some people there that night.
There was a young manager named Paul Heyman that was there with Idol and Rich in that time frame as well.
Wow. But John, you told me about that match in the past too. I think that's easily one of your favorites, right?
Absolutely. And I got to correct the great Willy B. It was only, according to Tommy, it was only a 6-pack of beer.
Okay.
But yeah, he told you that, right, John?
He did, because if you look on the internet and all, I mean, it goes from all the way to a 12-pack to a case and all like this. But he said that no, it was just 6 of them.
It was a 6-pack. I was fired up.
Nice one.
Yeah, old Tommy Rich, wildfire. Yeah,
wildfire.
He's a legend as well. Let's talk about him for a minute. He was red or white hot, as they say, in the early '80s, late '70s, all through Georgia, former NWA champion, and he was also a pretty big deal in Memphis. I mean, he had some legendary matches and feuds with Lawler as well.
Yes, he did. No question. All right, I'm gonna pick one up here, and I've talked about this on the show 8,000 times, and people are probably sick of me talking about it, but my trip to Memphis in '91, and they were working the Pipkin building at that point. Believe it or not, it was an opening match. I got to see a young kid named Rob Stokowski from Detroit, Elk Creek, Michigan, take on Nightmare Danny Davis in an opener.
Wow.
And I'm telling you, they brought the house down, the two of them, as an opener. Now, Davis got the win because he was the local favorite. Van Dam, he was later Rob Van Dam, by the way. He couldn't have been older than 20, 21 maybe. He's doing, the split-legged moonsault. He's doing all his moves. Davis is countering with, and he could go too. Danny Davis was much more than a trainer. He was also really
does not get the respect that he deserves.
No,
the wrestling side of it.
He anchored tag teams and everything else for a long time in that region, and Continental, Memphis, all kinds of places. And you know what? I got to tell you, after the match was over, I had to use the men's room, and I'm walking back, and somebody's near me, and I didn't even know who it was. I went, gosh, that may be the best opening match I've ever seen. And Eddie Marlin goes, yep, I think you're right. Now, I don't know if these guys, I was told by somebody there, I don't know if it's Eric Embry or something. He said, the guys are, no, you're with PWI, so they're putting their best matches together. You know this, don't you? I said, are you serious? He said, yeah, everybody knows New York is here. We're trying to give you, a little bit of our best foot forward. And they all, listen, I was in awe. Tony Anthony, Miss Jacqueline, I guess she was Miss Texas at that point. The Dirty White Girl, the Dirty White Boy, Dr. Tom Pritchard, Bill Dundee, to be able to rub shoulders with all the Jerry Lawler, of course. And more than that, there were more people there than that. Tojo Yamamoto. I mean, just go down the list. Wrestling Nirvana, man. I never had more fun in all my years in wrestling than that one little week I spent in Memphis, going to a couple of cards, enjoying Memphis. It was the best. But you know what? There were a lot of good matches in that card, but the one that's always stuck in my mind was young Rob Van Dam versus Nightmare Danny Davis. I have said it's the best opener I've ever seen. And I said it on Facebook, and Van Dam came out of the blue to acknowledge.
So he remembered it, I'm sure.
I would hope he did. And, after that, I went back to my office and talked to Stu Sachs, the publisher. I said, I know we have photos. I got to write about this guy. And I think I gave him his first national publicity under the name of Rob Stokowski or whatever he was going by at that point. And I am telling you, and this is not fake, I am sure I named the split-legged moonsault. He didn't have a name for the maneuver. I said, what do you call that thing? He said, I don't know. The thing where you kind of do a moonsault, but you kind of leap to the top rope, flip back. He said, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. I said, just for shits and giggles, I'm going to call it the split-legged moonsault in the magazine. He said, sounds good to me. And ever since that time, it's been picked up and used. So I think my little pinky in wrestling history is that I think I named that hold. I named that maneuver.
Take a bow, Bob. Take a bow.
Yeah, but you know what? That's what it is. It's absolutely a split-legged moonsault. We've seen a lot of moonsault, but nobody ever bounded off the ropes that way before.
Well, he was an innovator, as you know. You just described. He was an innovator, and just bringing true martial arts. He was a true martial artist background. I believe he was a kickboxer, and he just brought that to to pro wrestling. And he's insane athlete, just unreal.
Yeah, I saw it even then. I was, and Nightmare Danny Davis. Come on,
yeah,
they backed up physically beautifully. They were just about the same size, the two of them, and I'm telling you, wow. Rob was a little skinnier back then. He was just getting started out.
But Danny Davis today, he was back in the time where you had to be a giant, right? Especially in New York and all the places they wanted big men. Imagine with his style and his personality and all, he would thrive today. Absolutely thrive.
But your region accepted smaller wrestlers and tag teams a lot.
They did, but I'm talking about on a national scale where here's what used to bother me is we would see wrestlers. I've got a list I want to go through later, but we would see wrestlers that would come through Memphis where they get their shot at the big time, whether it's WCW or WWF. And it's like they didn't get the respect or they didn't get the push that we thought they got because they were, quote, smaller. They could go, they could work all day long. They had the personality, but they weren't 6'3" and 280. So therefore, they were just kind of discarded. And I hate that. Whereas today, they were big stars regionally. But today if you go watch WWE or even, AEW, any of those shows, they feature a whole crew of smaller wrestlers.
Mm-hmm. Times have changed. Yeah. But you know what, John, what's really true? Bill Dundee was a superstar there for 3 decades and nobody ever said a word about his height. Ever.
Yeah.
Right?
Bell ring. Bill Dundee was 7 foot tall.
That's exactly right.
He felt like he was being overshadowed by Lawler. Then that's when the heel Dundee would come out, and he was always really, really good.
Yeah, he was. He was terrific. Okay, John, I know you got more matches than this in your notebook. There, give me another match that you really enjoyed.
Well, you've definitely got my wheels turning. Talking about your trip to Memphis and the Pipkin building and all like that. Everybody knows that my all-time favorite horror movie, the 1974 original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Man, I loved Leatherface against Jerry Lawler. We got the pleasure of interviewing Dennis Knight, who donned the mask. So that was a really cool experience.
What was that match like? I can't even imagine what that was like. I was there on TV with Leatherface when he chased us all out of the studio and cut up the announcer's desk and all that stuff. Michael St. John and Dave Brown at that point. But what was the match like?
And in terms of actually probably how like the choreographed match went, it probably was, wasn't, ranking up there, one of the best matches of all time or anything. But, just as a horror and wrestling fan put together, it was just kind of like a gimmick come true for me, seeing, Leatherface getting a wrestle and all like that too. But pretty cool seeing Leatherface, take that fireball by the king too, cooking some Memphis barbecue, baby.
The brawling style with Midian or Dennis Knight. Yes, he was also one of the Godwins in the WWE, along with Phineas, and they were Tex Flazier and Shanghai Pierce for a hot minute in Memphis as well in the early '90s. And then also they ended up making it to WWF. They always have to give them a weird gimmick, whether it's the Godwins or the Disciples, whatever they were. They're part of the Brood, but they were unreal.
As the biggest Tony Anthony fan in the world, I was upset when he became TL Hopper. I have to admit, I said first thing I said is this ain't going to work, and you know what? It didn't work. I mean, you know what? You could have put Ricky the Dragon Steamboat in that as TL Hopper. It's not going to work. It's just not going to work. Period. End of story. Doesn't matter who the wrestler was, and I think he got handcuffed by that. And it's a shame because he got his break then, and what a shame.
But Vince, and that's the problem with Vince is, and nobody wants to say this, but it bothers me. There are times that you need to repackage somebody. There's times you want to bring somebody in for a gimmick, right? I get it. But he always had to change something to, quote, put his mark on it, and just couldn't let them figure out who they were. I mean, you think about it, without the ringmaster and then that not working and Stone Cold finally just being allowed to be himself, Steve Austin figured it out, there wouldn't be a Steve Austin. There would not be a Stone Cold Steve Austin if they hadn't just kind of gave it up, said, "Hey, you figured it out, kid." And then he did. But Vince always felt like, same with Steve Kern and Skinner and all these things, always having to put a gimmick on somebody as opposed to just letting them kind of be the best version of themselves.
But you guys know Memphis wrestling as good as anybody. I thought that promotion under Jerry Jarrett did that for most of his stars. There was a lot of the real people in the characters in Memphis.
Well, everybody talks about the characters, right? They would bring in, but the characters were for the stars, the real stars. Like Jerry Lawler had to take on the Soul Taker, all these things they would bring in. But to your point, they were real stars. It was real. Jerry Jarrett used to have to sign up in his office and say, personal conflicts or whatever. I'm paraphrasing. That's what matters. That's what sells.
Personal issues draw money.
Yes, thank you, John. And so they would bring in. Everybody laughs about Memphis used to have some gimmicks. Yeah, but those were brought in to be opponents. Your main stars were your regular guys. They weren't gimmicked up. They were versions of themselves.
Other than Frankenstein.
Right. But again, they brought that in as a gimmick. But
right.
Lawler, you had your mainstays. You always had Lawler, Dutch Mantell, Austin Idol, Bill Dundee, Eddie Gilbert, who we'll definitely want to talk about Eddie Gilbert. The Gilbert family in general. You had real, Terry Funk. You had real wrestlers come in, using their real names or their real wrestling gimmicks, not something that's just made up and goofy.
You don't realize this as a young fan and all. Of course, it was the days, but before the internet's just getting started and all like that too. But a lot of these guys were not like mortal enemies by any means, but they wasn't the best of friends. And like to piggyback on what Willie was saying, a lot of Jerry Jarrett and Lawler, Dundee booking, let a lot of these guys be themselves, and a lot of that spilled over. Like these guys weren't the best of friends. And I think that was, that magic was captured in some of these feuds and angles.
Absolutely, they were.
Because you're able to draw that out. If you don't really like each other in real life, you know how to pick and prod and pull that out of your opponent. Same, Lawler and Dundee are infamous for not liking each other very well. At least for a time period, they were rivals, right? They were competitors trying to outdo each other. But they also were phenomenal together, whether they were enemies or they were tag team. They were always great together.
Would you two consider that the best feud in Memphis history, Dundee Lawler?
Has to be.
John?
Absolutely. I think, Bob, you and I have talked about this before, too. I mean, the feud started around 78, 79, if I'm not mistaken, and went on, like 30 years. Power Pro Wrestling started in 1998 and went to 2001. And the opening show of Power Pro Wrestling in 1998 was, that first ever show was built around the feud of Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee. It was called, the final confrontation. So for something to start off in the late 70s and still use it in 1998, I mean, just put, the fans and audience should just really put that in perspective. I mean, to be able to draw money and still hold interest after all those years, I mean, that's phenomenal. It really is. There's nothing like it. I mean, those guys could be partners as well too, and just have you just as emotionally invested. Bill and Jerry are going for those AWA Southern Tag Team titles together. So
They won the AWA World Tag Team titles together. Yeah.
right.
That's right. Late. Yeah, that's right. But memories. I'm going to just throw a quick match out there that I saw via videotape probably 6 months after it actually occurred. I finally got to see the full thing. It's an obvious one, but it was national headlines, man. Andy Kaufman versus Jerry Lawler that ended up starting that whole rigmarole and then ended up on the Letterman show and all this other stuff. It may have been one of wrestling's greatest moments, the whole dang feud, as long as it lasted. Kaufman came in and meant it. He had wrestling in his guts, in his soul. He loved wrestling. And he wasn't goofing around. He wanted to be hated, and nobody was ever more hated in Memphis than Andy Kaufman. It's just magic from the word go. From the first promos he did to everything else, I've never saw anything better than the Lawler Kaufman snafu. That was just too good, guys.
Two things came out of that. In my opinion, it was the birth of sports entertainment and wrestling before there was sports entertainment. And nobody can ever, that feud was the biggest example of kayfabe that you can ever come up with. For Andy Kaufman to fool the commercial appeal and the doctors and nurses at the hospital with that broken neck, I mean, that's unbelievable.
That thing was picked up by the National News Services. I saw it on the 10 o'clock sports report in New York City, Channel 11, a guy named Jerry Gerard, and they showed Kaufman being, stretchered out and everything, being pelted with, ripped up programs. And the sports announcer said, boy, that's really classy. Why are they doing that to him? Well, they didn't know the backstory of why Kaufman got that much heat. Those tapes he sent in saying this is soap and all that other stuff. Outrageous.
Memphis rednecks and hicks.
Yeah.
He knew how to push the buttons. And then he only wanted to wrestle women. I think the great thing about Andy and that whole feud, to give an idea of how close to the chest Andy guarded it, Lawler has been quoted as saying that he went to an event honoring Andy a couple years after his death. And Andy's father went up to him and said, I really hated you. I didn't know until recently that what all this was. I legitimately thought there was a real feud, that my son truly hated you. And he started laughing. He goes, no, sir, he goes, I did not hate your son at all. Your son helped put me on the map. I mean, this was, we knew exactly what we were doing. And the other thing is that Andy never cashed a single check.
Right.
He was written. You think about that. Everything was on his own dime. He wanted to be so a part of wrestling. He'd want to be part of the WWF, but apparently Vince Sr. didn't want any part of it. And Bill Apter, of course, calls Lawler and says, hey, I got this, Andy Kaufman from Taxi wants to be on. And so they get in touch with each other, and as they say, the rest is history. But Kaufman never cashed a single check from Jerry Jarrett. That tells you something.
Speaking of foot in the dime or whatever, that the famous night where he took those multiple pile drivers, Lawler tells Calhoun, he said, tell Andy to get his ass up, get out of the ring. And he comes back and says, no, he needs an ambulance. He said, we're not getting an ambulance. That's $250. Kaufman said, I'll pay for the ambulance.
Pay for it. Yep. And it stays in the hospital, as y'all were just talking about, for 3 days.
Well, I saw the Tales from the Territories where they talked about that match or the whole Kaufman. People forget that feud lasted a long time, or Kaufman was in Memphis for a long time. And both Mr. Jarrett and Lawler and everybody else at that table spoke in the highest admiration for Andy Kaufman, because you know what? He just didn't do it to be on television. He didn't need to be on TV. He did it because it was in his heart and soul.
Yeah.
To be a bad guy pro wrestler. And maybe the greatest national feud of all time. I can't think of anything that made more headlines or created such a stir as that.
And Lawler and Jarrett were like, man, well, okay, we'll do it. You think about that. In New York, Taxi's huge. He's been on Saturday Night Live. He's a New York guy, and they wanted nothing to do with it. But it worked out better because you have a Yankee guy coming down the South and making fun of all of us hick Southerners. And it totally, totally worked. It probably wouldn't have worked as well had he done that in New York or even over in Minnesota with Vern. But he came down to Memphis, and the clash of the cultures, right? That worked out great. And and as they say, I don't know that it would have been any better had he not come to Memphis.
And they also, incorporated some different, other wrestlers and angles with it too. That they involved Man Mountain Link, Ken Patera got involved. So they, like you said, that feud went on for a while, and they were smart enough to, incorporate some other wrestlers with it too, to keep it going.
I remember the amazing double cross or triple cross, really,
Jimmy
when
Hart.
Kaufman at one point says, I'm a change man. I want to get a Jimmy Hart. I hate him. Jerry Lawler, would you help me? And Lawler goes, oh, I don't know about this. And then, of course, they double crossed Lawler and threw powder in his face. And it was just beautiful. Just beautiful. I mean, wow. I mean, yeah, you know what? Here's another thing. Jerry Lawler doesn't get enough credit for his creativity when he was in Memphis. Because I am sure that the first minute he had a phone call with Kaufman, I'm sure Kaufman was excited. And then he pitched the ideas, and probably he hooked Lawler into it and felt the sincerity. It takes a guy like Jerry Lawler to realize that, to understand that he meant it, that he wasn't just some guy who wanted to be on TV.
And I'm extremely, extremely biased and partial, and freely admit it. The king is the king down here. Even the handful of times I've met him in person, I'm always in awe. I'm just like, oh my God, I'm nervous. That's the king. But is there a better overall performer in the history of the business than, when you combine his success as a promoter, a wrestler, and the voice of Monday Night Raw, as a commentator, is there really anybody all overall that you can think of that's better?
I don't think there was ever a single wrestler who was the focal point of promotion who lasted as long as he did.
He sells out every Monday night at the Coliseum. There's 8,000 butts in the seat. Why is he going to leave?
And you know what? When he did venture to other territories like the AWA and the NWA infrequently, and he was over. He didn't need fanfare. Everybody knew who he was. I mean, it was one of the top 10 great wrestlers of all time. I'm absolutely convinced he is. I don't care about. And you know what? John and I have talked about this. Nobody's a better puncher than Jerry Lawler in his youth, especially that boxing. Man, I'm telling you.
And everybody that we interview that's worked with him, that's the first. They always bring it up. It's the best working punch in business, and then how good Lawler was in the ring. And he had no formal training. If you go back to his history, they just threw him in the ring. He lied to the promoters, some outlaw promotion over in West Memphis or somewhere in Arkansas. He wanted to go wrestle because Fargo at the time wouldn't let him wrestle. And then he goes and does his thing, and he just learned he's a natural talent. And that's what I mean by the best overall performer. When you add his time as a promoter, the focal point of a wrestler, and what he did as a commentator, it's unreal. He had 3 careers.
Yeah, he did. He really did.
And to piggyback on what Willie said, that's true for Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher. Neither one of them had formal wrestling training. There was no wrestling school involved. There was nothing. I mean, to put it nicely, Lawler just bullshitted his way through, and the rest is history.
Mm-hmm.
Brian doesn't get the love he deserves. He gets a lot of being Lawler's son. And what's funny is that growing up around here, there was no internet, right? But in the Memphis area, when we were kids, there was always the rumor that Brian was Lawler's son. And you look at him now and you go, how could you not see it? But it was a different time back then.
Mm-hmm.
If the people that went to school with Brian up in Memphis knew, but overall, it was always like, no, that's not really Lawler's son. But to Brian's credit, he never tried to say, I'm Brian Lawler. He was Brian Christopher, and he was absolutely phenomenal in the ring. A great promo. I mean, he was a natural heel, smart ass, like just unreal. He just doesn't get the, because he had troubles a little bit later in life. He just doesn't get the love he deserves.
Whatever you do, don't touch his little red wagon.
Exactly. Yes. With all his titles. Doug Gilbert loved to point that out, his little red wagon with all his titles. Because your daddy's the owner.
Well, we're talking about the Pipkin build and then Leatherface against Lawler and all like that. So let's go back to the origins. Why Leatherface was even here. Man, Eric Embry against Jerry Lawler. Eric Embry could legit have you thinking he's like, Jerry Lawler, I hate your stinking guts. And you would actually believe it. Those are some great matches too. And Eric Embry, Jerry Lawler.
I'm a big fan of the Tennessee-Texas feud. You had hit on it earlier. You're talking about Eric Embry. Another person I would love to interview. So Eric, if you're listening, we would love nothing more than interview you. The Texas-Tennessee feud is probably, outside of the Lawler match with Henning, is my all-time favorite feud. It was real. Eric Embry would get on TV, and I hated him. As a child, I absolutely hated him. I believed that he was evil, and he was so good at what he did. And Dr. Tom was so smooth in the ring, and they talked all that crap. They had Miss Texas. It was as good of a feud, long-term feud storyline as you're ever going to get.
I remember that. I was around for that. I'll tell you something. Eric Embry, he looked like an unmade bed a lot of the time. His hair was all disheveled, dyed blonde.
Damn,
Right?
he cut a promo.
He looked like but he could cut a promo and make you hate his guts in 2 minutes. I mean, when I was there, he attacked one of the referees on TV. It was just, he was mad at.
Probably was it Frank Morrell?
No, it wasn't Frank Morrell. It was one of the smaller. I think it was, no, it wasn't Paul Martin either. But it was one of the other guys, dark hair. I can't remember his name at this point. And I knew all the referees too. I just couldn't remember. It was something that happened in Pipkin the week before, and he belted him. Paul Neighbor. That's right. You got it. And I'll tell you what, this is what we like him. He's very unique, the flamboyant Eric Embry, but he wasn't too flamboyant. He's a jerk.
Yes.
I mean, a stone cold jerk. I mean, he was like, and he got himself over. And then later he goes to Texas as a fan favorite, and saves the USWA or whatever.
And that's what I meant to hit on. Is, that was back when they had merged, right? The USWA was still operating in Dallas, right. So they would go. It was the original, hey, you're a heel in one territory and a face in the other. They would go back to Texas, and they're the heroes. And then Jarrett and Fuller, whoever was going over there, were the bad guys. And then they come to Memphis, and they're the heels. It was it was great.
Yeah.
It was absolutely great. You're absolutely right, because it eventually, within a year, I don't know all the details, but I know that they had a falling out, and the USWA ceased operating in Dallas, and it became solely, Memphis wrestling.
Boy, it did fizzle quick, didn't it? You figured that would be a momentum builder. No. I can't figure that one out.
I don't know. I don't know if because you didn't have the Von Erich boys anymore, if that's what mattered in Dallas. I don't know if that is, I guess that would be the equivalent of not having Lawler in Memphis is my only thinking. I don't know really. I can't really think of anything outside of that.
You know what, though? I remember I was around at that point. It cost them a lot of money, and a lot of the same guys were going between Memphis and Texas, and that is not a short drive.
No, it's about a 7-hour drive from Dallas to Memphis.
And they were doing
I have a best friend that lives there, so I've made the drive a few times.
Some of those guys were doing it.
Yeah,
I remember doing it every week.
Correct.
I mean, you can't sustain that. You just couldn't sustain it. It was a great idea by Mr. Jarrett, but I think it was unsustainable in terms of a viable, profitable venture. What do you think, John?
Oh, absolutely. I totally concur with that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just too tough. It was too tough. I mean, they had TV in both areas. They had national TV for a bit.
And ESPN.
Still on ESPN, that's right.
We talked about that time frame of all the names. You talked about during that time frame of guys that became big stars. And one of those we talk about, I'm always proud of everybody that came through Memphis and made it big, especially in the Attitude Era, right? Where that was wrestling at its peak. You had The Rock. Flex Gavan, as we talked about earlier. You had the Road Dogg. You had Kurt Angle, Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Mick Foley, The Godfather, The Godwins, Dustin Rhodes, Viscera from Men on a Mission. Obviously, PG-13, they made it in the nation. You had Miss Texas. You had The Cat. You had Brian Christopher and Scotty Too Hotty. All these names made it big, and they were also a big deal, but especially The Rock and Stone Cold cut their teeth in Memphis.
Mm-hmm. That's right. People forget that. People do forget that. They really do.
Well, Austin talks about, being so broke that, that Jarrett wouldn't pay him. Everybody talks about Jarrett's like paychecks, but he would be eating raw potatoes. You think about that he would have to eating tuna fish and raw potatoes and trying to work out and stay on the road just to cut it and going back and forth between Dallas and Memphis. Not to mention they had to go up to Evansville, Indiana. They would have to go to Louisville. They'd go over to Jonesboro, Arkansas. They're down to Tupelo. They're hitting all the territories, right? So it's amazing the amount of miles they would put on a car within a week.
It sounds like me in my music days. Drive to Cincinnati for a one-nighter. That was nuts. It was absolutely crazy. John, it's so good to have you back on the show, man. And I'm glad you're having such success as 2025 started with big-time guests and everything else. I just read a whole list of the last 4 or 5 shows you've done. That's a who's who, man. You're doing a great job.
Well, thank you. We got some more big surprises coming too. I never stop. I just always try to, do something that I think the fans and audience, want to hear. And we appreciate, the support of people like yourself. And also, I got Willie here, so I'm not a one-man show. I got a lot of love and support in my corner. So I want to give a big shout out to my beautiful, gorgeous, sweet wife, Melissa, aka Foxy. And I want to publicly and personally thank Willie for, all the time and effort, energy he gives in supporting what we do. So thank y'all.
I don't think John and I have ever talked about this. Of course, I call him John because we've known each other since 7th grade. So we've known each other for over 30 years. And we always used to see each other at wrestling events, talk wrestling in school. And it was always like our thing. And we'd always joke. And he was joking me. And, man, you're about the only person I know that knows a little bit more about wrestling than I do. So we would always laugh. And then we thoroughly enjoy the show. And it's not, we don't sell advertising. We make no money off this. A lot of times wrestlers think that we're trying to get one over. And no, it's simply, we just want to talk about the old days. It's truly a passion project that we enjoy. And I hope it comes across that way. Again, we do no advertising. We're not trying to make money. We're not trying to, we just want to relive and remember the glory days of wrestling and keep those memories alive. That's our goal.
Well, you know what? I'll wrap this up with this statement. Thank God for videotape. Thank God for people our age who saw the good stuff when it was out. I am not going to begrudge anybody. If you're a young wrestling fan and you like today's product, go for it. I'm just glad there still is professional wrestling. At least we still have it. I mean, I have to admire what WWE is doing, filling up football stadiums every time they have a card. It's insane. But I will say this. Thank goodness we can all look back at the past. And it's kind of a golden age with people like Dave Dynasty and Mario Savoldi bringing back all these old tapes that I haven't seen in 30, 40 years at times. It's like magic to me when I see something I haven't seen in decades and I remember it like it was yesterday once I watch it. That's thrilling to me.
It's a core memory.
Yeah. I mean, I'll remember where I was. Was I in my bedroom at home watching on a black and white TV, or was I in a bar somewhere? You just remember when you look back at matches and shows that you saw and you really enjoyed when you were younger.
I'll go one even deeper. For me to be able to watch old Memphis tapes and from 30, 35 years ago, and they're unedited, which means I can see the commercials. That's what I watched as a child live on TV. I watched the old commercials from 35 years ago, whether it's Fleming Furniture or or Covington Pike Toyota, or all these things that Memphis people know. If I can start spitting out Memphis commercials, and it's so nostalgic and it's great. I love that almost as much as I love watching the old wrestling because it brings you back to that time and that era.
John, you were making a point there. I want to repeat what you said.
I was just to piggyback on what Willie said. I'm watching a lot of the, doing reviews and research and all like that too. That's kind of the fun, nostalgic part about it as well. Seeing the real commercials. I saw one the other night. It was like a Mustang, $7,500. I'm like, shit, we wish these days, man.
Right.
Guys, this is Mayor John McCall. This is Willie B. They are the hosts of Wrestling Talk with Mayor McCall. He started a podcast about the same time I did, and we ran into each other back then, and I'm so glad we did because it's like we've had nothing but fun talking to each other, and I hope to talk to you guys again really soon. This was a blast.
Man,
and, you bring back all the memories, guys.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. I love that you brought us on, and thank you for your hospitality and your passion for the business and helping us relive our childhood memories. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for having us on, Bob. It's always a pleasure and an honor, sir. Thank you.
Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with the elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today.
Well, there's another one in the books, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank Joe Puccio, our new co-host, for helping out on this one, and also Willy B and the great Mayor McCall, John McCall, for being part of this particular Memphis style outdated wrestling hour. I can't get enough of Memphis, and judging from your response, you can't get enough of it either. So thank you for listening. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Our website, outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, where you can listen to every one of our shows free of charge. Just log on, and there's also on there a list of most of our podcast apps. You can find it there. But if you're looking for the show and you're new to it, type in Outdated Wrestling Bob Smith on any browser, bang, it'll come right up in a variety of places. We're everywhere, including YouTube. So if you like Spotify, if you like Apple Podcasts, all the greats. Tune in, you name it, we're there. Also on our website, you can check out the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club, where for a nominal fee, you can help perpetuate the ongoing adventures of this meandering podcast. Check it out on outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. Find me on Facebook. I'm the only Bob Smith singing with BB King. I'm also at Threads. I'm also at Instagram, and I'm also at Blue Sky. So that's it for right now. We hope you enjoy this particular show. We'll be back next week with something new for y'all. I can't get Memphis out of my mind. I love Memphis wrestling. It's the greatest. I should say it was the greatest. I hope somehow, some way they make a big comeback in Memphis. But until that happens, I'll be watching them tapes just like all of you will be. My name is Bob Smith. I used to be with PWI. We'll see you next week on the Outdated Wrestling Hour. And as my rock and roller turned country western star Ringo Starr always says, peace and love, brothers and sisters. Peace and love.